Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Nancy Nyland, the Special Events Coordinator for Lake Oswego Reads, and thank you for those of you joining online as well. We could not pull this program together without the great support of the Lake Oswego Review, the City of Lake Oswego Rotary, and most generously, the Friends of Lake Oswego Library. We have one of our board directors here who would like to come and just say a few words about how you can support the Friends.
Wow, this sounds so official. I'm on a mic. The Friends, through our advocacy and our financial support, make this and over 100 events possible here at the library, events that the city doesn't pay for. And the only reason these happen is because we have community support and members of Friends, and we hope that you'll consider supporting Friends by going online to friends.lakeoswegopubliclibrary.org/join us. Thank you, Nancy.
My pleasure. Thank you. So we're joined this evening by Dr. Safran, who is a geomorphologist by training. She wants you to think floods and landslides, and is now obsessed with the Cascadia Subduction Zone earthquake. She got her undergraduate degree from Harvard University, and a master's from University of Washington, and a Ph.D. from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Not a bad series of places to study. Her most recent research uses custom-made video games and experiments to better understand what motivates young adults to prepare for earthquakes. She's also a member of the Oregon Seismic Safety Policy Advisory Commission and her neighborhood emergency team. Please join me in welcoming Liz Safran.
Well, thank you so much for coming tonight. Can you hear me okay? Okay. I can't tell you how delighted I am that Lake Oswego chose to focus on tilt this year and is hosting a whole month of earthquake-related programming. This is my idea of a good time. And it's exactly the kind of thing that I think we need to do, not just this year, but every year, for reasons that I hope will become clear throughout the course of this talk. Tonight's talk stems from an interdisciplinary project that I, a geologist, have been conducting with my colleagues at Lewis and Clark, Peter Drake, a computer scientist, Eric Nilsson, a psychologist, and Brian Seebach, a media scholar. So we have, as Nancy mentioned, been using custom-made video games in experiments to study what motivates young adults to prepare for earthquakes. So the crazy title of this talk references two characters who appear in all three of our games. Frank, who is always dressed in a hot dog suit, and Tsunami the Corgi, fondly known as a dog named Sue, for any Johnny Cash fans in the audience. Tonight, I'm going to describe what motivates the work we're doing, that is, what we're worried about, how we're using video games as research tools, what we found out, or at least some select examples, and why I think disaster-related fun is serious business. Our fundamental project motivation is the fact that the Pacific Northwest has the same kinds of giant earthquakes and tsunamis that rocked Japan in 2011 and the Indian Ocean region in 2004. And we're not prepared for them. The Pacific Northwest sits on a type of plate tectonic boundary called a subduction zone, where one plate slides down beneath another. Let's see if I can make this little, there we go, right. And gets recycled back into Earth's mantle. That sounds harmless, but subduction is not a smooth process, right? Rocks are rough, and the so-called sliding process is actually one of lurching. It's a process of getting stuck and unstuck, stuck and unstuck. And the stuck phase can last for hundreds of years. During that time, the tectonic plate that's overlying the one that's sinking back into the mantle literally gets bent like this. And the unsticking of the plate causes earthquakes and tsunamis as the bent plate snaps back into place. You can practically hear it going boing, at least I always think about that. And this so-called elastic rebound causes the rocks to vibrate violently, which is what causes the earthquake. And in addition, think about this, there's seawater sitting on top of this bent plate. So when it snaps up, it lifts up a column of water, which then collapses and oscillates and creates a train of waves that is the tsunami. All the biggest types of earthquakes on this planet originate in this way and on these types of boundaries. This hugely significant hazard is not really a pervasive part of our culture here for a few key reasons. First, the time period between these big ones, really big ones, is long. So the last one occurred 326 years ago and was captured in Native American stories and Japanese writings. You can read about the latter in a great publication, which is free and online, called The Orphan Tsunami of 1700. Second, especially in Oregon, we get really relatively few moderate-sized earthquakes to remind us that we are in seismic hazard country. And this is very different from what life is like in Japan or Chile or Indonesia or even California. Third, plate tectonics, which is the unifying theory of geology, is barely 60 years old. It's incredible. So prior to that, there wasn't a framework to tell us to expect earthquakes in locations like ours. As a result of all that, most of our regional infrastructure was developed in ways that are not designed to resist earthquakes or major earthquakes. And although good work is being done to catch up, our infrastructure is still not and may never be fully ready for a major Cascadia Subduction Zone earthquake. If a magnitude 9 earthquake happened tomorrow, and it could, look everybody in the eye, it would take months, if not years, to restore water systems, sewer systems, power systems, fuel infrastructure, major transportation networks, and healthcare facilities in the Willamette Valley. These images are from a simulation of what the Burnside Bridge would look like after a magnitude 8-ish earthquake. And you can watch the simulation yourself on Multnomah County's Earthquake Ready Burnside Bridge webpage. I highly recommend this. The point is, emergency managers are going to be completely preoccupied with really big problems in the aftermath of an earthquake. So, individual and community resilience is going to be the key to managing our aftermath of the earthquake. In other words, we have to cultivate a culture of preparedness in the absence of firsthand experience. And I think tilt is one great example of how imagined experiences can help fill this gap. We worked on another, namely video games. We have focused on young adults, partly because we're surrounded by them all day, but actually mostly because they're a really interesting group. They are much more capable and autonomous than little kids who get a lot of attention in this arena, but they're hard to reach They're very under-messaged, and they have a lot of their own vulnerabilities. For example, they may be financially insecure. They may not have control over their own living environments, if they're renters, for example. And they may have few community connections because they tend to move around a lot. We decided to study what motivates them to prepare for earthquakes and how video games might help. Video games resonate with the media preferences of young adults, and there's actually a rich field of study about how entertainment education can promote pro-social behavior through the media that people choose to engage with. Even among those media, video games are distinctive in that they are more interactive. They compel a more interactive engagement. You're not just reading about something or watching something. In some sense, you're actually being and doing something. And you can experience how the consequences of your actions might play out in rare situations. This is an image, by the way, of young adults snapping into action in the aftermath of the Christchurch earthquake series in 2010 and 2011. They eventually formed a group that they called the Student Volunteer Army and did really a lot of good. So, we were fortunate enough to get a grant from the National Science Foundation to study these problems. And we posed 3 related experimental questions guided by particular theories of what spurs the adoption of health-promoting behaviors. And that theoretical foundation gives our work more general meaning. We're not making games for their own sake. We're making them to try to understand something bigger. And I'll introduce some of the key variables in those theories along the way as we go. Each of the experiments that we did used a related game that we designed and developed to serve the related question, which is shown in the middle column here. And I want to point out, while we're staring at these load screens, that Cascadia 9.0 and 9.1 were wholly programmed by undergraduate students at Lewis and Clark College. The first experiment we did compared the effectiveness of gameplay versus web searching on these various outcomes of interest, which I'll describe. The second focused on how important a match between a player's living situation and that depicted in the game was or was not. And the third explored the effects of cooperating with someone else versus working alone to solve earthquake-related problems in the game. Each experiment was administered differently, which is listed in this column. The first one was during the pandemic, so we had one-on-one sessions via Zoom. The second was wholly online without supervision by one of the researchers. And the third took place in person in small research sessions on campus. And you can also see the number of participants in each study in these cells as well. This diagram shows the process associated with each individual study. So the game was the research tool at the heart of each experiment. And the development of the game involved iteratively programming, playtesting, which sometimes involved a formal focus group, and consulting with emergency managers to make sure that we were capturing their priority messages and hopefully avoiding content that they violently objected to. You can ask me about that later if you want, and can tell you some stories. Each experiment included a series of surveys administered right before, right after, and 3 months after the experiment task, which involved playing the game. And in the first experiment, searching the web, playing the game or searching the web. And we followed up some of our experiment sessions with a focus group, and after that, we did and still are sharing the results and have made the games public. I'm going to say a bit more now about each of our experiments and share a couple of key findings from each. And I thought it might be fun to start this out by showing you just a little snippet, a trailer actually, of our game, the first game. Patience. Cross your fingers, everybody. There's Tsunami, the corgi, escaping. Runaway corgis. You die a lot in these games. Okay, so recall that in the first experiment, we compared the effects of playing the game, this game, to searching the web. And participants were required to perform their assigned task for at least 5 minutes and up to a maximum of 45 minutes. And they could choose when to stop anytime within that window. The game that we used for this experiment includes 3 different ways of solving 4 different kinds of problems over 4 levels. And the problems are avoiding injury, obtaining clean water, finding safe shelter, and managing human waste. So one solution for getting clean water, namely collecting rainwater and boiling it, is shown in the screenshot from the game and also in the trailer that you just saw. To create, the purpose of having this sort of complex set of tasks was to create something that was sufficiently information rich that it would be fair to compare against web searching. And for that to work narratively, we created a structure where you play as a different person across the levels. So you actually assume the identity of 3 different characters over the 4 levels, each of which has their own little story about how they solved the problems that they faced. And a key narrative hook for the game was the ongoing search for Tsunami, who ran away in level 1 and is reunited with Zelda on level 4. Zelda's the owner. So participants in the web search condition were asked to search for solutions to earthquake-related problems in however they wanted. We did offer them 3 starter links to the earthquake sections of the Public Alerts, Multnomah County, and Oregon Emergency Management websites, because after doing some preliminary testing of our approach to the web search condition, we found that this seemed to strike a reasonable balance between encouraging natural searching behaviors, free searching behaviors, and increasing the likelihood that participants would encounter somewhat comparable types of information in their respective tasks. The sites that we chose contained or linked to, however indirectly, everything that was depicted in the game, and of course, much more. So now I will share a few results from this experiment. Now you gotta get into the data nerdiness here. Channel the scientist in you here. So this graph illustrates changes in 2 of the outcomes that we measured through participant self-reporting before and after the experiment task. So before or after they searched the web or played the game, depending on which condition they were in. Self-efficacy, or SE in this graph, is about belief in your own ability to carry out a novel behavior that you're considering adopting. You will not change your behavior no matter how strongly you believe in its benefits if it's not something that you're able to do. So self-efficacy is important. Intent to act is often viewed as a proxy for action because they correlate with one another, although there's also a lot of things that can interrupt that causality, that correlation. Both self-efficacy and intent to act are believed to be important variables leading to health-promoting behavior, in this case, preparedness behavior. On this graph, self-efficacy is shown in blue, while intent to act is shown in red. The solid lines show data from the people who played the game, and the dotted lines show data from the people who searched the web. On the x-axis here are 8 categories of action that we asked about on each survey. The items on the left were all things that were incorporated into the game, and the items on the right were things that we excluded from the game in order to have sort of a basis for a comparison. The y-axis, I suppose I could point with the laser pointer instead of gesticulating wildly, shows changes in levels of agreement with certain statements that are related to these variables on a 7-point scale. Like, in the event of an earthquake, I am confident that I will be able to manage bodily waste. That's a self-efficacy statement. Or, I intend to take steps in the next 3 months to ensure that I can have drinkable water. That's an intent to act statement. These p-values here and here are shown for statistically significant or marginally statistically significant differences in outcomes between the game players and the web searchers. So what I want you to take away from this is that self-efficacy increases significantly more, that is to say, is higher. These dots on the solid line are higher than these dots on the dotted line for the game players than for the web searchers in 2 key game task categories that are obtaining drinkable water and managing bodily waste. These were tasks associated with multiple or multi-step mini-games, some of which you saw in the trailer, right? There was the water heater mini-game and there was the rain barrel mini-game. There were only small increases in these 2 things for the web searchers, which is interesting. This was a surprise to us and indicated that people were not thinking about these as needs that they would need to fulfill. Self-efficacy, interestingly, is also marginally significantly higher among game players than web searchers for dealing with psychological trauma, which we did not include in the game. And this intrigued us because it hinted at an unexpected potential benefit of video gameplay. Facing and overcoming stress in a simulated environment may equip people to feel like they can face those things in a real event. And in fact, a couple of people in our post-experiment focus group did explicitly comment that the game made them feel more mentally prepared for a disaster. Besides short-term gains in self-efficacy, game players also spent significantly longer engaging in their task and enjoyed it more than web searchers did. They also downloaded more information and made more training inquiries afterwards. We wondered whether the game format would compromise the perceived legitimacy of what people were learning from the game But surprisingly, game players trusted their information, the information they encountered, just as much as the web searchers trusted theirs. 3 months later, the differences between the gameplay and web searching kind of evened out. The good news is that both playing the game and searching the web led to more self-reported steps taken to prepare for an earthquake. We also found that after 3 months, self-efficacy stayed relatively high, while intent to act generally came down to pre-experiment levels for both game players and web searchers. We noticed something interesting among the web searchers, though, specifically. During the experiment, one of the things we did was to document the web searchers' behavior. Where are they actually going? What are they doing? And when we looked for patterns in their behavior, we saw that everybody looked at the links that we provided, to those curated sites, and about half of the people did some free searching on their own. So I'm calling those the CS curated sites group and the CS plus group. Here you can see the numbers of people who played the game and the number of people who searched the web in this experiment, and that one is broken apart by how many were in the CS group and how many were in the CS plus group. What we found was, perhaps not surprisingly, those in the CS group spent less time, significantly less time, browsing than those in the CS plus group. That sort of makes sense. If you're going to spend a certain amount of time looking at the curated sites, but then you also go on and you do some extra searching, maybe it makes sense that you spend more time. But we found that those in the CS group trusted their sources more than those who did any free searching. Things get really interesting 3 months later. Not all the people who searched the web in the original experiment completed the follow-up survey, so the numbers get much smaller. But we detected some very systematic patterns. We found that people who only looked at the curated websites, the CS group, during the experiment reported higher intent to act, self-efficacy, and steps taken than those who also did some free searching. And this pattern is clearest in intent to act, which is shown on this graph. So if we compare the post-experiment values of intent to act with those values 3 months later, the CS group retains or even gains a little bit of intent to act. But the CS group drops way down. Why does this happen? We don't know for sure, but there's a couple of possibilities. Some researchers, Kim and Allen, found that web search navigation patterns are sometimes linked to problem-solving style. So specifically in their study, they found that people with what's called an emotion-focused coping style tended to do more keyword searches than people with a problem-focused coping style. So emotion-focused coping includes things like fatalism or denial. So, we're all going to die, so why should I prepare? Or this is never going to happen, at least not in my lifetime. And in contrast, the problem-focused coping style aims to actually address the threat. In the context of disaster, problem-focused coping has been positively correlated with self-efficacy and intent to act. So it's possible that the web searchers who have a problem-focused coping style were the CS group, right? They just searched those curated sites, while those with more of an emotion-focused coping style did more searching. A different possibility is that the act of doing that extra searching caused some cognitive overload, because formulating queries and tagging the results are the most sort of cognitively demanding parts of web searching behavior. And there's also a particular type of cognitive overload that has to do with taking in extraneous information or receiving extraneous information alongside relevant information. And one of the interesting things that we saw is that 15 of the people in the CS Plus group searched for something called the triangle of life, which is a discredited approach to taking protective action during an earthquake that's mentioned on one of the curated sites as an example of what not to do. And it may be that exploring this and other dubious strategies undermined the perceived reliability of the website information and therefore the longer-term stability of changes in self-efficacy and intent to act. So our results suggest that while telling people what not to do is certainly intriguing, it may be in a counterproductive way. Okay, the second experiment we did focused on the match between the physical environment depicted in the game versus a player's own. And I'm going to show you a little trailer from this game as well. Let's see. It's worked so well the first time. This might be a little bit louder, so. Grab the rubber chicken. Okay, so we were attuned to this question of identifying with living situation because a lot of preparedness advice assumes conditions that don't necessarily resonate with young adults. For example, store a whole bunch of water, many gallons of water in your tiny apartment that you share with 3 other people. So the other thing is we wondered whether seeing your own city depicted in the game would have more of an impact on players than seeing the action play out in somebody else's hometown. So we developed a game that was hopefully recognizably, set in Portland, and recruited participants from both Portland and Seattle to play it. We also made 2 versions of the game, one which was set in a house and one, well, that is to say the player character lives in a house, and one in which the player character lives in an apartment. The player character in both versions of the game has to deal with problems of sanitation and getting clean water, but the way that they solve those problems is different depending on the game's dwelling type. For example, in the house game, players will dig a pit latrine to manage waste, while in the apartment game, they create what's called a 2-bucket toilet. We wondered whether a participant playing through a solution that they couldn't perform, for example, an apartment dweller who has no space to dig a pit latrine, would feel less self-efficacious about that task than somebody who lives in a house and might well be able to perform it. We did not find any clear evidence that a match between the player's situation and either the dwelling type or the city of residence depicted in the game systematically affected self-efficacy and intent to act from before to after playing the game. In a sense, this is good because it means that detailed customization, which is costly in terms of time and energy, is not required for the game to be effective. There's some hint that possibly playing the house game overall is more effective, but it's not really very clear. In retrospect, we also wondered whether Seattle versus Portland was a strong enough manipulation, because they do have some physical, features in common, and they're both subject to the Cascadia Subduction Zone earthquake. This graph shows the pre to post task change in the key variables that we care about for all the game, averaged over all the game participants in relation to 6 actions, 4 of which were in some version of the game and 2 of which weren't. And those are using a fire extinguisher and keeping from inhaling dust right here. So what we find is that this graph shows whether the changes from pre to post are statistically significant. If they are, then the columns are solid colors. If they're marginally statistically significant, then there's that Hatchard pattern. And if they're not statistically significant, then the bars are hollow. In addition to self-efficacy and intent to act, which we've already looked at, I want to introduce the concept of outcome expectations here, which relates to the statement, my safety and well-being will improve if I can. So in other words, it's about how significant an impact a given action would make, whether or not you intend to take it or you can take it, right? How effective is the action, do you think? We don't see outcome expectation changing much in these actions, and that's because in general, it's already very high at the outset. People know what they're supposed to do. People know that it would make a big difference if they stored 15 gallons of water, and the game doesn't change their feelings about that, except in the case of managing sanitation. We now have come to call this the sanitation surprise, right, where outcome expectation increases significantly only for those actions because the game effectively calls people's attention to the need to manage sanitation, which is generally not on their radar beforehand. One thing that we see in this game is overall playing the game matters, right? Everything goes up. Actually, any intervention can cause that to happen. Sometimes even being in the control condition of an experiment can cause changes, positive changes. Just calling this problem to mind matters. But in detail, we're actually persuaded that there's something interesting going on, and in particular that mini games where you're executing this multi-step process are having an effect, amplifying this effect. So there were multi-step mini games, for example, for digging a pit latrine and creating a 2-bucket solution, and these are relatively tall columns. Purifying water was in both versions of the game, so that one is extra tall. Each of these was only in one version of the game. Storing 15 gallons of water was in the house game, but did not involve a mini game, so it's a little bit more passive and less persuasive. This graph decomposes the impacts of what's in the game and not in the game more explicitly than the previous graph, which was averaged across all participants. So you're going to have to hang with me for this one. Because it focuses in particular on self-efficacy, and it represents how self-efficacy varies among people who made different levels of progress in the game. So those levels of progress are shown on the bottom here, 0 to 3. 0 means the player never left the home scene, and there weren't very many people who couldn't figure out how to do that. 1 means they traveled and they talked to other non-player characters, like you saw in the trailer. 2 means they completed the water purification minigame, and 3 means they completed that and the sanitation minigame. So basically, at that point, they've won the game. The purple lines are the people who played the apartment game. The blue lines are the people who played the house game. The solid lines are self-efficacy averaged only over actions that were in that version of the game. And the dotted lines are self-efficacy averaged over the actions that were not in that version of the game. So what I want you to take away from this, and by the way, the participant's own residence type was not taken into account in this graph because we found that it didn't matter. So the thing I want you to take away from this is that self-efficacy for actions that were in the game are higher for people who made more progress in the game. And that is not true for self-efficacy for actions that were not in the game. Are you all with me? So the further you get in the game, the higher your self-efficacy if we're asking about actions that were actually in the game. So all this to discover playing the game matters. Hooray! It's like, yay. Okay, so, and the point is, doing something in the game makes you feel like you can do those things in real life. All right, so in our second experiment, we also measured changes. It's like, deal out the next variable. We also measured changes in an index of anxiety, a state trait anxiety index. And we were inspired to do this by some comments in the focus group that followed our first experiment, in which anxiety and discharging anxiety by doing something was a big theme. And that there was also that intriguing suggestion that gameplay might help with feelings of mental preparedness. So here, I'm showing how all the variables of interest, all the characters we've introduced so far, if you will, self-efficacy, outcome expectation, intent to act, change with level of progress, and anxiety, which, by the way, is on a 4-point scale compared to a 7-point scale. And what I want you to notice, just generally, is that the further you get in the game, generally all the preparedness-related variables go up. Anxiety, if we measure across all participants, goes up from playing the game, right? Didn't that trailer stress you out? However, if we look at anxiety as a function of progress in the game, those who made it further were less anxious. So this suggests that the game has perhaps the potential to lower that anxiety. Our third experiment, I have to apologize because we don't have a fancy trailer for this game, but I thought I would show you just a little snippet of it. And it deals with the question of managing in the aftermath of an earthquake, either by yourself or with someone else. And the game focuses on environmental hazards, like downed power lines and gas leaks, and some other things that you'll see. Some of the problems are easier to solve with 2 people, but there are costs to cooperation too, because to win a level, both players have to survive. So let's see if we can pull this little guy up. It's a very unofficial little video clip. rehearsing, speaking of anxiety. Poor old Frank. He's about to get roasted. Okay, that's enough of that. So Frank walked into a down power line that was still live. Yes, or walked too close. It's very, the best advice is to skirt widely around any down power lines that you may see. This is one of those stories that I can tell you about in the end. But yes, that's the advice if you are trapped and have no other way past. So our third experiment did focus on these impacts of solo versus duo. And in this experiment, we were interested not only in self-efficacy, but something called collective efficacy, which and related concepts. So collective efficacy is the belief that working together, a community or a group can achieve its goals. And we thought that people who played together might have a higher collective efficacy than people who played alone, or that they might have higher expectations of getting or giving social support. On the other hand, we also wondered whether they might feel less of a sense of personal responsibility for preparing if they had just had the experience of, being helped out by somebody else. In fact, it turns out none of these things were true, which was quite surprising to us. We did find, again, that playing the game significantly increases the self-reported scores for almost all of these pre-behavioral variables for all participants. But again, what's in the game matters significantly more than what's not in the game. So in this graph, the dark-colored bars indicate significant changes related to actions that were in the game, and the light-colored bars are significant changes related to actions that weren't in the game, and the hollow bars indicate changes that were not significant. Our 3-month follow-up survey shows the same patterns for self-reported steps taken to prepare for an earthquake. So some examples of actions that were in the game were shutting off a gas valve, otherwise they explode, otherwise the building explodes on you, and keep from inhaling smoke and dust. That was, you're able to do that if you don your mask. Examples of things that were not in this game were creating a safe shelter for yourself and others, or purifying drinking water using chemical treatment. Not in this game. Some significant differences that we did see between single and two-player condition were that playing the game alone increased anxiety, but playing the game together did not. So there you have it. People who played in pairs did show a significant increase in the perception that most people can be trusted, and this was not the case for people who played in single player condition. But it didn't translate into anything else that was related to behavior.
Were they side by side or were they remote?
That's a great question. They were side by side. They were playing in what we call couch co-op mode. Yeah. So, but we took steps to ensure that they did not have a close relationship with each other, beforehand. So we had to kind of juggle participants and which condition they were in to make sure that they were playing with relative strangers. Great question. So the other thing that we did discover is that people playing together played for longer, enjoyed it more, and were less frustrated than people who played alone. So here are some overall lessons from all these experiments. Firstly, intervention is important. Let's all just think about this in whatever way. But we also see clearly that more change is driven by the contents of the game, right? So what's in the game also matters. Playing the games make people feel more confident about their abilities to prepare for and cope with an earthquake, especially in the ways that they practice in the mini games. People do report being more prepared 3 months later, but also their good intentions wane over time, even though they know that it would benefit them to prepare. So you have to keep refreshing these intentions to act. The game setting doesn't have to match the player's setting in detail or situation, and playing with somebody else doesn't dilute one's own sense of personal responsibility for preparing or alter expectations about getting or giving support. Engaging with disasters does make people anxious. That's a fact. But people who play the game and play it for longer, I should say play it for longer. Some people who do play the game a little bit get more anxious. But if you keep playing, then you'll be less anxious, or if you play it with somebody else. And web searching and game playing both spur people to prepare, but game playing is more fun, especially when you play with somebody else. And this fun piece is really important. We think of preparedness as something that is separate from our daily lives. But we need to find lots and lots of ways of making these hazards that we face and the ways we should prepare for them much more visible, even in the absence of firsthand experience. We don't just need facts and instructions. We need vicarious experiences. We need to be able to imagine what an earthquake and its aftermath will be like. And I think that's what tilt really does. It really puts you in that experience for an extended period of time. And I think for a little bit of time, our video games do that as well. And the more that we build this content into the types of sources that people willingly seek out, the easier it will be to develop the earthquake culture that we so badly need. And I'm going to conclude here with the URL to our website where you can access the games. And now I'll invite your questions.
That's my big question. It's an actual game.
Oh, there's 3 of them. Yes, absolutely. 3 games, all free, all Cascadia9game.org is the URL. Yes.
Can you talk more about the demographics of the Can you talk more about the demographics of the different participation groups, and especially for the first game, were they similar demographics between the web search and the game players?
Yes, they were. So we confined our target audience to the ages of 18 to 29. So that's how we defined young adults.
That's Gen Z.
Is that Gen Z?
That is Gen Z, yes.
Yeah. So, and again, we were interested in that group because it's well known that people with children and heads of households feel a stronger motivation to prepare, especially people with children. And we wanted to catch these young adults mostly before they had children to explore what was going to motivate them.
I was mostly interested in men versus women in the 2 participant groups.
Oh, yeah.
It was evenly divided.
That's a good question. I think that it was I can't answer that off the top of my head, but I'm going to say I think it's possibly slightly more women than men, but I need to check on that. Yeah.
So did the same participants participate in all 3 experiments?
No, we
Oh.
actually excluded them if they had already participated in a prior experiment because they knew too much. Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting the kinds of things that primed people. That's a great question. So actually, in this image on the left here, you see that it looks like actually our students. I asked them to include shake alert in Cascadia 9.0 after the experiment. Because Cascadia 9.0 has kind of been running around for a little while. It's been played more than 20,000 times, and a few teachers have used it in schools, and we thought it would be a great way to get people to learn a little bit about shake alert. So now, if you play Cascadia 9.0, on levels 1 and 2, your phone will start to buzz, and if you go over there and you click on it, it will pull up an alert, an earthquake early warning alert. And that made me think that could be a whole thing unto itself, a game unto itself, where each level or each round is really quick, maybe just a minute, and it's all about what you do when you get an alert or when you start to feel shaking, because you don't always get the alert before the earthquake starts. And just many, 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 many different situations, right? And you're playing as, you're a little kid, or you're a person in a wheelchair, or you're, in a classroom, or all these different situations. I think that could be fun. So if that would be certainly my next video game endeavor.
This was fascinating. Can we give a round of applause to our speaker?
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much. And maybe we can convince Dr. Safran to stay a tiny bit after if you have questions you want to ask one-on-one.
Sure.
Thank you.